Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we will talk about how COVID 19 cases managed to reduce in the Dharavi slum in Mumbai and the steps that the BMC took to make it possible. We will also look at the militant encounters that took place in Jammu and Kashmir on Sunday. But first, we talk about the ongoing India China crisis in Ladakh. For over a month now, tensions have been escalating between the two nuclear armed nations along the line of actual control, or the LAC. The Chinese soldiers have transgressed along at least 3 points on the LAC: the Galwan Valley, Pagongso, and the Hot Spring area. On the 15th of June, violent clashes had taken place between the two sides in the Galwan Valley. These clashes had killed 20 Indian soldiers and injured 76. Clashes such as these had not taken place in over 5 decades. Since these clashes took place, a number of statements have been issued about the incident and about the region that have created a lot of controversy. This includes a statement issued by Prime Minister Narendra Modi that said that no one has intruded in the Indian territory, and one statement by Chinese Foreign Ministry that said that the Galwan Valley is located on the Chinese side of the LAC. In this segment, Shubhajit Roy, who reports on matters of foreign affairs for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about these statements, the controversies around them, and the things that remain unknown about the situation between India and China. Shubhajit, starting Friday, there were a number of statements made by the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of External Affairs, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry that have been in the news, created a lot of controversy and confusion. So I wanted you to unpack these statements for us and talk a bit about what each of them reveal. So could you start by talking about what the Prime Minister said on Friday in an all-party meeting and why that became controversial?
So the Prime Minister, he spoke after the all-party meeting as his closing remarks, which were put online by social media handles of the Prime Minister's office, as well as it was tweeted out. And it essentially said that neither has anyone intruded into Indian territory, nor has anyone captured any military post. Now, he spoke in Hindi, but this was the exact translation of what he said in that 10-minute closing remarks.
पूर्वी लद्दाख में जो हुआ उसको लेकर आपने रक्षा मंत्री जी और विदेश मंत्री जी को सुना भी और प्रेजेंटेशन को भी देखा। न वहां कोई हमारी सीमा में घुस आया है, न ही कोई घुसा हुआ है, न ही हमारी कोई पोस्ट किसी दूसरे के कब्जे में है।
This created a huge controversy because it contradicted the government's own statement just 2 days before, when the MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, it put out a statement that the clashes took place, there was a transgression on the Indian side of the border. Now, when this statement came, this was seen as a complete reversal and contradictory to the Indian government's own position by its own leader. So that was latched on by the Chinese media as well, and they started raising questions on Indian government's version of events earlier this week after the border clash. So that complicated the matter, and opposition parties as well raised the issue that if there was no intrusion by Chinese troops, then how was there a clash, and how did 20 soldiers die and several others injured?
And then on Saturday, you also had the Prime Minister's office give a clarification. What was that clarification and how much did that clear things up?
The clarification came the next day by the Prime Minister's office, which essentially said that the no intrusion remark was for the situation after the clash at the Galwan Valley. So essentially saying that there were no more Chinese soldiers present at the Galwan Valley at the site of clash after the clash. So this sort of clarified the issue, but the first day's statement was actually on its own when it was read. It was correctly interpreted as contradicting the Ministry of External Affairs statement. And that had complicated the matter, and the Ministry of External Affairs had to come out also with a statement later in the day, because the Chinese Foreign Ministry had also put out a statement claiming the Galwan Valley and giving its own account of events, where it had said that the Chinese troops were attacked by the Indian troops. So, to which the Indian government also countered to that particular claim.
Shubhajit, how much do these statements affect things on the diplomatic negotiation table? Because if the Chinese have transgressed and the prime minister says that they haven't, and, like you mentioned, this is the point where the Chinese media latched on to and said that, hey, your leader of the country is saying that we haven't transgressed, so why is all the controversy? So what kind of risk do we run of the Chinese interpreting such statements and then using it against India?
So, in international diplomacy, the convention is that the foreign ministry's statement is always considered to be the final word, because those statements are carefully crafted and they're vetted and they're put out after professional diplomats and political leaders, they put their mind on it. They thrash out the correct language, the correct usage of words, that. But having said that, when the leader of the country says something which is contrary to the foreign ministry statement, it obviously complicates the matter and it complicates the negotiations, because it gives a handle to the opposite side that your leader is saying something which is different from what you are saying, what the foreign ministry is saying. Essentially, that's how it matters, the leader's statement, how it is worded, or how it is delivered, and how it is interpreted. That's why it was much more important for the foreign ministry and the prime minister's office to clarify those statements. And obviously, it did that exactly that way the next day, that's on Saturday.
The other statement which made a lot of news was the Chinese Foreign Ministry saying that the Galwan Valley was located on the Chinese side of the LAC. How unprecedented was that, and what has been India's reaction to that?
So the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a statement about an hour or two after the Prime Minister's statement. Ordinarily, what happens is the Chinese Foreign Ministry holds a press conference almost every weekday. That briefing usually takes place around India time, around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Beijing, and it's in Mandarin. Now, the transcript in English usually comes by late in the evening. Now, that day, what happened was when the transcript came, after the transcript ends, there was a full-fledged paragraph saying that there was a question that after the briefing, questions were asked on the version of events at the India-China LSC. Then there was a spokesperson's statement, which was in English, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson's statement in English, which was a step-by-step account of what happened during this clash and all of that. In that, the opening sentence was that Galwan Valley belongs to China. Now, this was an unprecedented formal claim by the Chinese since 1962, according to the Indian government. According to the Indian government, the Chinese government has not made a claim on the Galwan Valley, and it has always been seen to be part of Indian territory and Indian side of LSC. So this actually created a big controversy, because before that, the Chinese army, that is PLA, spokesperson and the Western Theater Command had made a similar statement staking claim, but it was reported and it was also countered by the foreign ministry. But the foreign ministry, when it makes a statement, as I told you earlier, it means that is the position of the government of China. So it was taken much more seriously, and then it was again rebutted by the Indian government, by the MEA on Saturday, that it is not correct and it is different from what the Chinese have claimed historically.
Could you talk a bit about just, in terms of, because the LAC essentially is a disputed border in the sense that, our perceptions and their perceptions don't match. And in some places we do agree, in some places we don't agree. So in that sort of line, where does the Galwan Valley stand?
So the LAC, as you know, is the de facto border, but it neither has been marked, delineated on the map, or has been demarcated on the ground. So it's a perception on ground where our troops go up to patrol, because that is the LSC claim line, and the Chinese side also does the same. Now, the Galwan Valley is to the east of the LSC, as we know, as per the maps that have been released since 1962. And it is clearly and firmly in India's territory as per the history of and the maps that are shown in the last 60 years. So there is no ambiguity there. In fact, even Chinese maps don't actually show the Galwan Valley as part of their territory. So therefore, the LSC is firmly to the west of the Galwan Valley.
Shubhajit, talking about the statements that we discussed earlier, first the Prime Minister's statement, then the clarification issued by the Prime Minister's office side, then Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. Considering all this, what sort of questions about the situation are still up in the air? What are the kind of things that we don't know, don't have a clarity on? Like one example is, a question that has been raised by a lot of people is that whether during the 15 June clash, whether Indian died on the Indian side or the Chinese side. What are the questions sort of remain unanswered?
Well, there are like a series of questions that have been unanswered right from early May. That, what exactly triggered the process? What is the status of the infrastructure that is said to be built by the Chinese on the Indian side, whether that's being built, whether those reports are correct or not? Then there is complete opaqueness about the circumstances in which these clashes took place and what have been the casualties on the Chinese side, whether there have been any casualties. And there were 10 Indian soldiers, including 4 officers, who were held hostage, held captive. Now, what happened? How were they in the custody, and what led to their release? Were there any terms and conditions? Were there any quid pro quo that has been agreed? So all these are questions that are in the minds of people of this country, which need to be answered by the government at some point of time. And also, what is the path forward from now? How does one de-escalate? Are the leaderships talking at the right levels? Is it enough at the foreign ministry levels to talk, or should it be escalated at a higher level? So all these are questions that are still unanswered and are up in the air.
Shubhajit, you've been covering foreign affairs for a number of years now. And in your experience, how unusual is this situation and how typical are these sort of unknowns? And what do they reveal about the present situation?
So the time that I have covered, I have not seen, firstly, an escalation at the LSC of this magnitude, just because this is the first time since 1967 that such a bloody clash took place. In 1975, the last time Indian soldiers died, the number were 4 soldiers. This time there are 20, including a colonel rank officer. And the brutality with which the clashes took place, as per reports that we know as of now, are also unprecedented. And the deployment at the LSC from both sides that we're seeing is also close to, or some even say could be higher than the buildup that we saw during the 1962 war. So, all these make the situation much more complex, much more dangerous. And right now, the de-escalation process has to happen with the facts on the ground. What are the motivations? What are the intentions of the other side? And to address those issues, that what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable, that should be clear in the heads of the negotiators so that they can move and chart a way forward to de-escalate and diffuse the situation.
Next, we talk about Dharavi, which is one of the largest slums in Asia and is located in the city of Mumbai. A city which continues to report one of the highest COVID-19 cases in the country and has been a major cause for concern over the past few months. To reduce the spread of the virus, social distancing is paramount. This is the reason why when Dharavi became a hotspot in mid-April, a place that houses close to 8.5 lakh people all living in cramped quarters, it rang alarm bells. But since then, the area has seen steady decline in the number of new cases. In fact, on Saturday, the new addition to cases in the area were in single digits. The doubling rate of cases in the area right now is 78 days, the highest in Mumbai. In this segment, Sanjana Bhalerao, who reported on the story for the newspaper, joins us on a call from Mumbai to talk about what led to slowing down of the cases and how the BMC's, the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation's efforts in the area have led to these results. Sanjana, Dharavi had always been seen as a risk. It houses a lot of people. The area is such that social distancing in many places is just not possible. So how did Dharavi manage to reduce its number of cases to the point that it's now only seeing cases being added in single digits? What were the steps that the BMC took, after the first case was reported in the area?
So one of the most important thing that you also pointed out in your question is about Dharavi, that the two important measures, lockdown and social distancing, were just impossible in this area. Given the population density, given the type, given the common public toilets, and all the issues were there in front of everyone. The first case reported in the slum cluster within Dharavi was on April 4th. And what worked in controlling the spread or controlling the numbers now is that BMC, or the Mumbai Civic Body, immediately got into action. To give you an idea, within 48 hours, they barricaded the entrance and exit of the slum cluster. They found out how many people live there and what are their needs regarding food or the ration that they would need for another month of 14 days. At that time, no one had an idea how long the lockdown will go on. They carried out the disinfection of the public toilets, because that was one of the main concern for civic body, that the population, the majority of population, there uses common public toilets. And from there, the spread of infection can go to other slum clusters as well. So the first thing that they did was disinfecting all the 425 public toilets across Dharavi. Then began door-to-door screening of people in that slum cluster to check for any symptoms. Not just the high-risk contacts or the low-risk contact of that first case, but they started with screening all of them. This early detection through door-to-door screening and getting people helped them in lowering the death rate and also early detection. So they could put all of the people who had symptoms or get them tested and shift them into the quarantine facility instead of their houses.
And these early screenings, which you write were done for some 47,000 people, they were done by the BMC staff themselves. But soon after, they had to change that approach and actually get medical professionals to do the screenings. What was the reason for this change?
One of the very important things to learn about Dharavi is that other than the population density, even the administration know that people have a trust deficit. To give you an example, one of the health worker staff had said that whenever they went for door-to-door screening, asking people just about basic questions like what are the symptoms, if they have any other health problem, or to just ask them if they need anything, they realized that people were lying to them. They just didn't believe them. They thought that if administration is in the area, that means that they will evict us from our houses, or there is some ulterior motive. They didn't believe the BMC staff at all. So now door-to-door screening was the only method the BMC had for early detection. But this wasn't working. So they changed the strategy. And instead, they got local practitioners, local private doctors. There were 350 of them who pitched in. Now, what helped BMC was these local doctors were known people. They trusted them. They used to go to them for their health problems. Then they started believing, okay, that there's a virus, there is a problem. They started understanding what are the symptoms. So the private doctors and the citizens, there was a bridge between them, and there was a synchronization where the cases were and early detection started. And with this, BMC also continued with their door-to-door screening. They didn't stop that, but the results were far better when the people started coming to the doctors and to the clinics.
And what other challenges did the BMC and officials face, and in what way were they unique to Dharavi? Like, for example, we mentioned social distancing earlier. That's of course a problem there, but also, things like ensuring that everybody gets the right kind of information, gets it on time, and that everybody follows basic hygiene protocols. What were the challenges in that regard?
So in Dharavi, one of the other things that should be noted is it's just not a residential slum sprawl. it also has a hub for small scale industries. It's very much possible that in the house, ground floor would be a small scale industry and people would be living there, or the workers would be living inside it at the night. So this was one of the very tough tasks for BMC to find out, because again, these were the workers who were living there. They didn't have a house structure where they have toilets, they have kitchen, or they have food material for them. They lived very hand to mouth. Daily wage earners stepped out in the afternoon to figure out the food, and also making people understand that what is social distancing. So BMC, as I mentioned earlier, through private doctors helped them a lot. And they also started with vans going around in Dharavi, announcing in the local languages, what is this virus? How does it spread? What are people not supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? And also, one of the most important things BMC kept telling them again and again was not to hide any symptoms. They will put them in a quarantine facility which is well within Dharavi, which is known to them. They will not go to hospitals. There is no problem of the hospital. So this positive image building, that we are ready and we will serve you, was the BMC's approach to make people understand what is this whole exercise about.
And like you mentioned, Dharavi houses a lot of daily wage earners. And during this time when industries have closed, a lot of people have lost their jobs. What kind of challenges did the BMC face in ensuring that people get their rations and their daily meals? And did they have to take help from other sources to sort of fulfill this need?
To give you an idea, that in the first month of the lockdown, when it was the strictest, BMC served around 24,000 families in the containment zones, sending them dry ration and also food packets to 19,000 people every day. This was the one area where the distribution of the packed food was highest in the city, for that matter. Then again, to make sure that people don't step out, because as you mentioned, that people did have fear that how long this would go on. And also, a civic body also had a problem that how long they can also manage. The funds were drying up. What then BMC started doing was a crowdfunding exercise specifically for Dharavi. So anybody could donate 3,000, 5,000, 200, 500 rupees, and they prepared a ration kit that would be given to each and every family within the containment zone for next 3 months. So people had this assurance that, okay, we are going to get the ration kit, the medical kits, which would serve a family of 4 for the next 3 months. And BMC started distributing it. That was one of the strategy that BMC used so that people get some faith in them, and also that they don't step out and don't sleep hungry.
During this time, we had seen, the migrant exodus, migrant laborers from, all parts of the country returning back to their villages. And as I understand that, there are a lot of migrants that were living in Dharavi that left to go back to their villages. How much did that sort of help manage the crisis better and just make it less intense?
It helped in a way that the burden on the civic body who were also managing the spread of the infection and distributing the food, that burden was eased out. So the number of people stepping out of their houses just to collect food packets went down. So going by the figures that civic body is saying, they say that 1.5 lakh people just from Dharavi left to their respective villages during this last 2 to 3 months. So according to BMC, it helped them to ease the burden. They didn't have to worry at least about the food packets and distributing dry ration. And also the number of people who were to be screened went down.
You also write that schools and sports complexes were converted into quarantine centers. How many such places were used for that, and to what extent did they also help?
So there were 9 facilities that BMC shortlisted. One of the important factor in this was BMC needed an already constructed spaces with the toilet facilities, water, and other spaces. And also they needed spaces which could hold a large number of people. One of the very unique things that happened in Dharavi was that they wanted to put, for example, one person is infected. If they're living in a slum, in and around, all neighbors were considered to be the high risk contacts. And there was no option of they living in that slum cluster because, as I said again, the common toilets was the biggest fear, the fact that it would spread infection to other areas as well. So they needed quarantine facilities immediately and in and around Dharavi so that the traveling time is also not large. So around 9 such facilities, sports complexes, schools, because again, there were no schools working. So at that time, the schools were used as quarantine facility. So as of now, let's say till June 19, there were some 8,500 people who were quarantined in such facilities.
So, what is the situation in Dharavi right now? What are the steps being taken now that the cases are considerably reducing?
What Civic Body is doing now is that they are releasing the containment or the strict measures that they had earlier and allowing people to move around so that they also get back to their business and there is some economic generation. As I said, there's a lot of small scale industries that Dharavi houses. So BMC is figuring out an unlock plan just for the 2.4 square kilometer Dharavi area and listing down the small scale industries which they can allow with minimum workers and with social distancing measures that the small scale industries can work so that also people get an idea that things are going back to normal. Because since April 4th, the 13 high risk zones within Dharavi are in very tight containment zones. They're not allowed to step out. Nobody is allowed to step in or go inside Dharavi, at least in this 3 high risk zone. So now the rise in cases is just single digit. BMC is preparing an unlock plan for Dharavi.
Is there any one measure that has stood out for authorities and experts that they feel has made the most difference?
Two important things that worked for BMC was the early detection. And the early detection of these cases was a door-to-door screening and also to the private practitioners and the fever camps. The fever camp is like a health camp where people, if had any health-related issue or had any symptoms, approach them and BMC could collect the test samples from this fever camp. That worked for them. And second thing was putting people in quarantine. Dharavi is also one of the areas where the ratio of people in quarantine is quite high, that is 1:10, and in some places it is even 1:15. So this early detection and putting the people well within the quarantine facilities for 14 days worked really well for them. One of the clear example of it is that initially when this number started rising, BMC marked 13 high risk zone, and that 13 high risk zone has not increased, which meant that if the cases were rising or the new cases were coming, they were coming from this 13 high risk zones only. It didn't step out of these zones. So this containment within zone worked for them.
And in the end, we talk about Kashmir. Yesterday, the Jammu and Kashmir police said that 4 militants, including a Pakistani national, were killed in 2 separate encounters in Srinagar and Kulgam districts during the past 24 hours. Among the militants killed was Shakur Farooq Langu, who was involved in the killing of 2 BSF personnel on May 20th this year. According to J&K police, a search operation was launched in Srinagar following inputs about the presence of militants in the area. The police said that during the search operation, an appeal was made to the terrorists through family members and community members to surrender, but instead they started firing indiscriminately, which led to an encounter. Mobile internet services were suspended in view of the operation. The police also said that among those killed in the encounter has been identified as a foreigner. According to police records, he was an operational commander of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed and an expert in making IEDs besides being a sharpshooter. Security forces have eliminated 31 militants in June, while 105 ultra-militants have been killed this year so far. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.